Olga Petrovna never thought that her grandson Oleg would get so angry with her and stop talking to her. There hadn't even been a real conflict, yet the resentment was there. It all started when the young man brought his future wife home. All the relatives welcomed her warmly. Oleg's parents were especially happy that their son had decided to settle down, as they had long dreamed of having grandchildren. A few months later, the young couple started talking about the wedding. It turned out that the bride was quite demanding. She didn't like the color of the restaurant, the musicians, the host, or even the guest list. Oleg seemed to ignore all of this and indulged his fiancée in everything. But Oleg's parents were the first to sound the alarm. One day, as they were sitting in the kitchen, they decided to talk about it. Olga Petrovna, the mother of the head of the family, was pouring tea for everyone. The family sat in silence, with tension hanging in the air. Oleg was clearly unhappy that only he had been invited to the family dinner, while his fiancée had not. "Olezhenka, don't be upset. We just want to talk to you, and that doesn't mean we don't love your future wife. Christina is already a part of our family. We just want to discuss something," Oleg's mother began, sighing heavily. "And what's so important that you didn't want Christina here? No one forbade you from bringing her. It's just that your grandmother wants to talk about something important," his father interjected. The man was clearly displeased with the hostility his son had brought into their home. None of the family members wanted to harm him or his fiancée, but now it seemed that Christina had influenced Oleg, and he was responding to every remark with aggression. "All right," Oleg said with a sigh. "What do you want to talk about?" Folding his arms across his chest, the young man looked around at his relatives. The head of the family also folded his arms and looked intently at his son. His mother smiled, pleased that her son had softened his tone. Meanwhile, his grandmother, sitting down next to her grandson, pushed a cup of hot tea toward him. "Grandson, we wanted to talk about my wedding gift to you." Hearing this, Oleg's eyes lit up. The topic of gifts was something he really enjoyed. He already knew what his parents would give him for the wedding, but his grandmother had kept her gift a secret until the very end. "The thing is, I want to transfer ownership of my apartment to you as a wedding gift," the grandmother continued. "I'm old and frail. In a couple of years, I want to move to the countryside. It's getting difficult for me to live in the apartment. So, the apartment will be yours. But, as you understand, life can be unpredictable," she said, taking a sip of tea. "What do you mean by that?" "Grandma means," his mother responded, clearing her throat, "that the apartment should be transferred to your name before the marriage. That way, if anything happens, you won't have to divide it, and you'll always have a place that is truly yours. Do you understand?" Oleg paused for a moment, thinking. He liked the idea of having his own apartment. However, the thought of other people living there made him a bit uneasy. Nevertheless, he agreed to everything. All that was left was to wait a week and go with his grandmother to the notary. After discussing the news a bit more, Oleg decided to head home to his girlfriend, leaving his family alone. From the look on his father's face, it was clear he wasn't particularly happy with his mother's decision, but he didn't want to argue with her. His mother-in-law, however, decided to speak her mind directly. "Olga Petrovna, it's certainly a generous act that you want to leave the apartment to your grandson. But it would have been better if you wrote a will instead of gifting it. After all, his fiancée is very cunning. Give her an inch, and she'll take a mile." "Marina, you're wrong to think that way." The grandmother shook her head. "We were all like that when we were young, but we changed. But I have no doubt that the apartment will belong solely to Oleg. Once I move out, they can do whatever they want. And what if they sell it? Then let them." But just 2 days later, the woman regretted everything she had said. The newly engaged couple was already standing at the doorstep of her apartment. "Hello, why have you come so early?" Olga Petrovna asked in confusion. "Hello, I'm Oleg's future wife, and I'm here to check out the apartment that will soon be ours." With that, Christina walked straight into the apartment and began looking around, leaving Oleg, who had lowered his head, and Olga Petrovna at the door. "Wait a minute, what makes you think you'll be living here right away?" the woman asked, snapping out of her daze and following her future granddaughter-in-law. "Well, once we're married, we will," the girl replied without turning around. Oleg said you're going to transfer the apartment to him, but I don't like that. Let's make it in both our names. We are a family, after all. Olga Petrovna widened her eyes in surprise and looked at her grandson, who was trying his best to stay out of the situation. Oleg, we literally agreed on everything just yesterday. Are you planning to kick me out in my old age? But you have the countryside house, Christina replied instead of him. You were planning to live there anyway. I can help you move your things if needed. We need to start the renovation here as soon as possible, so that we can move in right after the wedding. But how can I move to the countryside? There's still a lot to prepare. I told my grandson yesterday that it would happen in about 2 years. Wait a minute. Christina suddenly stopped and put her hands on her hips. Are you trying to cheat us? You promised your grandson the apartment and now you're backing out? Listen, Olga Petrovna, that won't do. If you told your grandson the apartment would be his, then you need to keep your promise. Yes, Grandma. It's not fair, Oleg added. Olga Petrovna almost clutched her heart. She never imagined that her grandson would treat her this way. So what does this mean? Just because I decided to give my apartment, which I worked for years to afford, to my grandson, you've decided to throw me out. That's not how things are done. Olga Petrovna tried to reason with the young couple. Grandma, don't make a fuss. You've lived your life, now let us live ours. How much space do you really need at that countryside house? Don't worry, we'll bring anything you need. Her grandson dismissed her. With shaky legs, Olga Petrovna sank into a chair. She watched as her grandson and his fiancée, already acting like they owned the place, went around deciding what to keep and what to throw away. She looked around her small apartment, which she had willingly planned to pass on to her grandson, and suddenly realized that Christina had been right. It would be better to write a will and let them sort it out later. After all, it turned out that her grandson was ungrateful. You know what? I've changed my mind, she said, surprising even herself. What do you mean you've changed your mind? Christina immediately asked. I'm not going to transfer the apartment to Oleg. I can see how ungrateful you both are, coming here to evict me before I've even prepared the documents. Shameless. As she said this, the woman, with tears in her eyes, looked at her only grandson, who didn't even seem to feel guilty. Oleg was shocked. He probably thought his grandmother wouldn't change her mind. Grandma, what's this? You said the apartment would be mine and now you're backing out? You can't do that. You can't behave like pigs, my dear, but you can always change your decision. Well, if that's how it is, Christina huffed, crossing her arms and pouting, then don't bother coming to the wedding. We won't be expecting you and don't want to see you there. With that, she walked straight out of the apartment, her head held high. Oleg, without much hesitation, gave his grandmother one last look before following his fiancée out. Frightened and shocked, Olga Petrovna remained seated in her chair. Many thoughts raced through her mind, but one thing became clear. Her future granddaughter-in-law was having a terrible influence on her grandson because he had never been like this before. Deciding that the young couple would cool off before the wedding, the woman resolved to write a will after all. As planned, she would move to the countryside in a year or two, leaving the apartment to her grandson.